Someone digs a hole, somewhere in the deep past, long before anyone alive today. Not fast, not carelessly on purpose, with real intention, deep enough that scavengers won't easily reach what goes into it. A body is lowered in. Something is placed beside it, a tool, a flower, a shell, something that took time to choose, time that could have gone toward anything else. Picture doing that yourself, for someone you loved. Then the hole gets carefully filled back in, and whoever did the digging walks away, having done something almost nothing else in nature does with this much deliberate care. A small handful of animals, elephants among them, have been documented partially covering their dead, but nothing that comes close to a dug grave, chosen objects, and ritual. You've probably never really thought about the first time that ever happened. Not once. Most people haven't. But somewhere, at some point, a species that had never done this before did it for the very first time, and the honest answer about when and who is a lot messier than you'd expect. Stick with me here, because the answer might not even be us. Here's the problem nobody warns you about. Burial sounds like a simple thing to spot in the fossil record. It isn't. A body can end up underground by accident, buried by a cave collapse, washed into sediment by a flood, covered by scavengers dragging it somewhere to eat later, or just left in a spot where dust and debris slowly piled up over centuries. None of that is burial in any meaningful sense. Real burial means someone dug the hole on purpose, positioned the body deliberately, and often left something behind with it. Proving intent from bones that are tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, of years old is brutally hard. There's no note left behind, no witness, nothing except bone position, soil layers, and whatever objects happen to be lying nearby when someone finally digs the site up. Think about how thin that evidence actually is. So when archaeologists say this is the oldest burial, what they usually mean, if they're being careful and honest about it, is this is the oldest case where accident seems genuinely unlikely, based on the physical evidence we can actually measure today. That's a much shakier claim than it sounds, and it's exactly why this question stays controversial decade after decade, discovery after discovery, with no sign of settling down anytime soon. Let's start with what almost nobody seriously disputes. At a site called Kafse in what's now Israel, archaeologists found human skeletons dating back roughly 100,000 years, deliberately positioned in pits, with red ochre pigment and animal bones placed alongside them. One skeleton, a child, was found with a set of deer antlers arranged directly against its body, not the kind of thing that happens by accident, not the kind of thing you'd expect from a random collapse or a flood. That's Homo sapiens, doing something recognizably close to what we'd call a funeral today. For a long time, that was treated as close to the starting line for burial as a species-wide behavior modern humans, deliberate graves, real grief expressed in stone and pigment and careful arrangement. Here's the honest part though. The oldest agreed upon case and the actual first time it happened are not the same claim. And in the last several years, that gap has become the most explosive controversy in the entire field. In a cave system in South Africa called Rising Star, researchers found the remains of a hominin species called Homo naledi. Its brain was roughly a third the size of ours, closer to an early Australopithecine than to us. By almost every measure we use to associate with advanced cognition, Naledi shouldn't have been capable of anything like deliberate burial. That was the assumption for a long time. Small brain, simple behavior, no capacity for the kind of forward planning and symbolism that burial implies. And yet, the bodies were found deep inside an almost inaccessible cave chamber, a chamber so difficult to reach that getting there today requires squeezing through gaps barely wide enough for a human body. In complete darkness, without any obvious natural way for bodies to have simply washed in or fallen there by accident. The discovery team argues the arrangement of the remains is difficult to explain by any accidental process, and that the dating puts this behavior at least 100,000 years before Homo sapiens is known to have done anything similar, and quite possibly hundreds of thousands of years earlier than that, depending on which estimates you trust. If the burial claim holds up, it means a small-brained relative of ours was deliberately handling its dead long before we were doing anything we have solid evidence for. Let that sit for a second, because it's a genuinely big deal, and it's not something science communicators usually get to say with a straight face. I have to be straight with you here though, this is not settled science. A lot of paleoanthropologists have pushed back hard, arguing the evidence doesn't clearly rule out natural burial by sediment and cave processes over time, and that the case is being overstated by a discovery team with an obvious interest in a dramatic result. Right now, in 2026, this argument is still actively happening in academic journals, with real researchers on both sides who are not fringe voices. We're not going to pretend there's a consensus that doesn't exist. Naledi isn't the only contested case. Either Neanderthal sites, especially Shanidar Cave in Iraq, have produced skeletons in positions that some researchers read as deliberate graves, limbs arranged, bodies oriented consistently, in ways that are hard to attribute to chance collapse. One skeleton was even linked, controversially, to clusters of ancient pollen that sparked the now famous flower burial theory, the idea that Neanderthals laid flowers over their dead, a detail that made headlines around the world and reshaped how an entire generation thought about Neanderthal intelligence. That specific detail has been challenged hard since. Later research suggested the pollen may have been introduced by burrowing bees or rodents disturbing the soil long after burial, not laid there deliberately by mourners at the time. But independent of the flowers specifically, several Neanderthal burials at Shanidar and other sites are still argued as genuine on the basis of body positioning alone, flowers or no flowers. So depending on which specific claims hold up under scrutiny, deliberate burial might not be a uniquely human behavior at all. It might be something at least two, possibly three, entirely different hominin lineages arrived at completely independently. Here's where this stops being just a fun fact. For a long time, treating the dead with ritual care was used as one of the clean lines separating us from them, proof, supposedly, that only Homo sapiens had the inner life required for grief, symbolism, meaning that goes beyond raw survival. Museums, textbooks, entire theories of what makes human cognition special were built partly on that line holding steady. If Naledi and Neanderthals were doing something similar, that line doesn't hold, at least not the way it used to be drawn. It's not a comfortable finding for anyone who wanted a clean, simple story where advanced cognition arrived once, fully formed, in us alone, and nowhere else in the hominin family tree. Science doesn't owe us a comfortable story, though. It just owes us the evidence. And right now, the evidence is pointing somewhere messier, more distributed across species, and honestly more interesting than the version most of us grew up with. So why did humans start burying their dead? The honest answer, we don't know exactly when, and we're not even sure we were first. What we can say is that somewhere, more than once, in more than one species, something changed. A body stopped being just a body, just biological material to be left behind and forgotten. Someone, or something, decided it was worth the effort of a hole, dug on purpose. And something placed beside it that meant something to whoever was doing the placing, a decision that cost time and energy with no survival benefit at all, which is exactly what makes it worth paying attention to. Maybe that instinct is older and stranger and genuinely less uniquely ours than we've spent most of recorded history simply assuming without ever really checking. So here's the actual question worth sitting with. If it turns out we weren't the first species to grieve like this, what does that change about what you thought made us human in the first place?